You are listening to Salty Believer Unscripted, a conversation on Christian ministry and the Christian life.
This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Josiah Walker.
I'm Bryan, Catherman.
And on today's episode, I want to talk about the SBC.
Of course you do.
It's been a couple weeks since we talked about the SBC. It's been some time. So I figured it was time again.
It's because the convention's coming up in June.
The convention is coming up. It's right around the corner. So, of course, it's time to revisit this. Plus, this is going to get more exciting in the future. I don't know if we've told our listeners this yet or not, but you're moving on to a different church.
Yes.
Non-SBC church.
Correct. EFCA, Evangelical Free Church of America.
Awesome.
Yes. So
exciting.
I thought I was going to get out underneath the wire, and kind of, I was feeling the sense of, hey, there's a big circus kind of, and maybe this year I get to watch the circus from the sidelines instead of feel like it's my monkeys.
So I wanted to pick your brain while you're still in the trenches with me before the convention, because by the time of the convention, you will have moved on to your new post.
No. The convention happens before I go, but yes, it won't be long after.
So let's talk about the SBC. Last year's convention, just to remind our listeners, got a little heated. Made some changes to the Baptist faith and message.
Yeah, last year was a doozy. They had the whole thing with Saddleback and some other churches, and what does it mean to be in friendly cooperation with the denomination? I think people outside the denomination, they don't know that it's a cooperation for the purposes of mission, but all of the churches inside of that cooperation are locally autonomous, meaning they govern themselves. And so then it's just a matter of when these churches come together, how do they cooperate for the purposes that they've decided they're going to attempt to achieve? And earlier on, that was just sending missionaries.
Right.
And that has since grown, and now the purposes are huge. And this machine has gotten so big that now it seems like all of the churches have to serve the machine.
Sure.
Opposed to the other way around. So we're losing that autonomy. So the question last year was, can a church who has a female pastor / elder, and could be in friendly cooperation.
And not even just the lead pastor, but any quote-unquote pastor title, I believe.
I think that's the issue that we're still really, really wrestling with. I think there's a challenge in kind of who the SBC is, and is this a major issue, or is this an issue that should be just deemed to the local churches to decide? Meaning, can you call a person, a female, an elder, which would be synonymous with pastor, which is what was changed in the Baptist Faith and Message. So if you have a children's pastor and it's a female, they're saying, nope, you can't do that, or, yes, you can. And so that the change to the Baptist Faith and Message was that a pastor, elder, or overseer are synonymous terms. So we're talking about title, and I think what we need to remember is, in the big scheme of things, we should be talking about function.
Absolutely. And we talked about that last year when that happened. We did some podcasts on that and discussed that. And while we kind of agree with the changes that were made, it was a little concerning that you could make changes so quickly.
Yeah, the Baptist Faith and Message got changed real fast. So then also the theological statement, 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 7 minutes, suddenly made this clarifying line. Now, I agree with the clarifying line. I believe that the term pastor is synonymous with the term elder, and I believe that office is reserved for qualified called males, so a very small group of men in the church. So that was a good change.
Yeah. So now, here we are a year later. Do you think that's kind of just, that's done, that's over with?
No, not at all. Well, so here's what happened. So an amendment was made, a motion was made to amend the Constitution to match the belief statement.
Okay, so that's a separate document.
Yeah, so the Constitution is kind of here's how we function, not this is what we believe or declare. So they call this the Law Amendment because it was named after the person who made the motion, and they made a motion basically to say, let me think how this works. I've got it. I pulled some stuff up here. So to be in friendly cooperation with the convention, the church must, let's see. Any church that affirms, appoints, or employs only men as any kind of pastor or elder as qualified by Scripture would be in friendly cooperation. So any church that has a woman in those roles, so I'll just read it again. So to be in friendly cooperation, the church must affirm, appoint, or employ only men as any kind of pastor or elder as qualified by Scripture. And then they had a vote. To change the Constitution, you have to have 2 consecutive years where they vote on the amendment and it wins by 2/3 majority, and then it becomes a change to the Constitution. So it was a huge, overwhelming majority last year, and so now, in order to finalize this change, they have to vote for it again.
So this conversation started last year regarding the Constitution. Okay.
Yep. And
so this will be the defining year.
So people will come. I've spoke with one pastor who has said, "Yeah, I'm going, and I'm voting against it."
Okay.
Right. And other pastors are saying, "Hey, I'm voting for it." And there's all among the Southern Baptists who are concerned about the issue. There's a lot of stuff on the internet and a lot of people talking about what does this mean, because this isn't just about women in ministry. And I think that's what we need to really realize here. This isn't just, can we call a woman a pastor or not? Can we change the title to woman's minister? This is really, in a lot of ways, about doctrinal position in contrast to local autonomy. Where do we draw the line where suddenly we're not in cooperation anymore?
Right.
Right. And so that's where this gets so complicated, because I pulled up two things so I could get the titles right. We have Dr. Mohler, Al Mohler, who is really pushing for the passage of this constitutional amendment. So he has a video, you can find it on YouTube and his other social media channels, called "A Statement on Doctrinal Clarity Before the 2024 Annual Meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention." And it's about an 8-minute video where he talks about the significance and the importance of being clear. And he's basically saying we've already defined this with our faith statement, and now we need to be very clear so that any church that has, a children's pastor who's a woman would not be deemed in friendly cooperation. On the flip side, go ahead. Well, you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say, for our listeners who aren't steeped in the SBC like we are, Al Mohler's a seminary president.
Yes, he's
our
the
denomination.
President of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's been very vocal on this topic because he did help with the changes to the Baptist Faith and Message in 2000.
So last year it was kind of him and Rick Warren were kind of the main speakers
regarding Rick Warren being removed. Yeah. So
So.
he's been outspoken, and I think his video is clear, compelling, cogent. He makes a good argument.
Okay.
But then this is where this gets really tricky. But then you have an article written by Dr. Jeff Iorg,
who used to be a seminary president.
Yes. In fact, we've had both of these gentlemen on our podcast before.
True.
So he used to be the president of Gateway Seminary, formerly Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary. Presently, he is the president and CEO of the Southern Baptist Convention, basically the executive committee. So these are very influential.
And what's his article?
So his article, thank you, his article is at baptistpress.com. And you'll have to probably search for it. It's a little bit buried, but it's called, just because it came out a few days ago, and they publish a lot of stuff. Actually, it came out on May 22nd of 2024 by Jeff Iorg, I-O-R-G, and it's called First Person, this is an article thing they run, A Perspective on the Proposed SBC Amendment Regarding Women in Pastoral Ministry.
Okay.
So he makes a fairly lengthy, detailed, compelling, clear, cogent argument on why the Southern Baptists don't need this kind of a change to the Constitution when it is in the faith statement, and what will this mean for how this works. What he's not saying in here, and I appreciate this, he's not saying that he thinks that women should be elders. Okay. He's not saying that the title of pastor should be, a lead pastor should be a woman, or that even that a children's pastor in a church should be a woman. He's not advocating for that, and neither is Al Mohler. They're both saying, look, that issue is, we've already established that in our belief system, or our statement of faith. What he's saying is, we have an issue here where we have to determine what local autonomy looks like.
Sure.
So if we say this is what we believe the Bible teaches, then we already have the sufficient means to say this is what we do, this is what we believe. We don't need to add these lines that then start to create more detailed issue that could turn into a witch hunt for people who are not in friendly cooperation, and vice versa. And then new things could be introduced to this, and then we could add another thing and another thing and another thing. And so here's where all this really lands for me. For me, I think this is a real crisis of identity.
Sure.
This is not on the forefront that we see what the public sees, what people who aren't paying close attention see is an issue of women in ministry.
Right.
But that's not the issue.
Sure.
The issue is how connected are churches who call themselves Southern Baptist churches supposed to be? How autonomous are churches who call themselves Southern Baptists supposed to be? And right now, the world's politics, the way we argue has come into it, where some people will hold that everybody has to be identical and we're not okay with differences.
Right.
It can't be like John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul being friends, even though one baptizes babies and one doesn't. Nope, no friends, cut ties.
Right.
There's that perspective, all the way to it doesn't matter as long as we just say we love Jesus. Right. So these are these wide-ranging poles, and the hard part is there's camps all over the map.
Sure.
There are positions, opinions all over the place, and everyone wants to shape the SBC to look like what they think would be the best.
Right.
That's
Which
the
I
trick.
think that's what happens when a denomination gets as big as our core operation is. I mean, here you have two big powerhouses within our core operation.
Oh, probably the top voices.
Right?
Yeah.
On both sides of this issue, which really kind of centers around function versus title. But that's, like you said, it's just really a symptom of the overarching problem. And I think the problem is we've got a denomination that really could break off into 4, 5, 6 different denominations.
And I'm going to argue should.
Yeah.
The reason it doesn't is because how do you divide up the
funds,
property,
the resources?
the money, the resources, the seminary? But there's such differences that we're now no longer focused on the mission. We're now no longer focused on the reason why we co-op. We're focused on how to inform and change why we co-op.
Right.
In fact, and this is bled down. This is trickled down. So I'll give you some examples. So we're part of the two-state local convention, Utah, Idaho Southern Baptist Convention. And even within the churches within just these two states, and a lot of the state conventions are one state, but in our situation, with less than 200 churches, there are huge differences.
Sure.
Among the pastors on how this should go. And there are huge differences between different pastors and even the people who serve in the denominational level, who are supposed to serve those churches. So you have denominational workers. I was talking to one we're pretty close to, and he's talking about how we changed the Constitution to better improve what we're doing in our two states. And he had made a comment, and I don't know how this is going to go. They're just working on it. He was like, what would really help this thing go is if we removed the convention officers. Now, those are the ones who are elected by the messengers to lead and direct, and basically put all of the decision-making and all of the direction, I think, into just only the executive committee members or only the director of the organization. So, his thought is, let's remove more of the voices, the pastors and messengers and people coming in, and let's increase, a smaller group and just kind of see how that may help the efficiency of the organization. The hard part, though, is it removes a lot of the autonomy. And he's mentioned on a repeated basis that some of that autonomy will sometimes have an impact on why we can't get stuff done faster. So if we could just get rid of this autonomy in some ways...
Which is so contrary to what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Now you've got this top-down hierarchy structure versus a cooperation.
And I think, the goal is, man, if we could change this or change that, we could fix child abuse issues, or if we didn't let churches hire their pastors, but the organization vetted them, then we could control it more this way. So it's an autonomy issue, and it's also an identity issue. What is the purpose of this big convention? And it's really hard to argue that the purpose is as missional as maybe it once was or should be, because it's gotten so steeped in some of these other things, right? And so that's what we're going to see at the convention coming up, right? What we're seeing is an identity crisis. I'm sitting, and I'm having lunch with another pastor, a friend of mine. We're talking through this a little bit, and his struggle is a very legitimate struggle, and his issue is, we have these beliefs as a church, and we want the freedom to have a little bit of some differences. And then I meet with another individual who's a pastor in a church, and he wants really clear doctrinal connection.
Right.
Without he doesn't want to have a little more looseness in how some of the churches function. And so the interesting thing is if I were to talk with both of them, I think if I were to say, do you think that the office of elder is reserved for males, I think they'd both say yes, and then it plays out a little differently on how and what, and then there's still function issues because we have churches in our 2 states that wouldn't allow a female to have any sort of teaching role with children in any way or with women at all, and certainly not use the title pastor whatsoever. Yeah. And then we have churches that actually, I think, do use the title of pastor for women. Yeah. This is our women's pastor, whatever. Yep. All within Southern Baptist churches, all within the 2 states. And so you can see why it's not an issue of title for women. It's an issue of who says and how and kind of. And so how are the messengers going to vote? With Al Mohler contending one way, Jeff Ward's contending another, everybody having time to think about it since, the last convention, it all happened so fast that nobody really, okay, what is this? What are the ramifications? What does this mean? What do we do with this? So I think that will be the biggest anticipated circus. Sure. But I think it's always helpful to remember that there's always these things that come up, because a lot of this came up last year, and we didn't see it. We didn't see a change to the Baptist faith and message coming. I didn't even know it had happened. Everybody voted. I'm watching online, and I'm like, wait, did we just do that? Right. So there'll be a lot of these things. And then I think the biggest questions that will bleed out of this is, there are some that are really concerned that people will either not participate as much, and Jeff Ward does talk about the silent disengagement, which I'm totally guilty of. Like, this is missing the mark. This is a distraction. I'm going to put my head down and I'm just going to focus on the church that I'm serving. So there's concerns that people are disengaging. There's concerns that people won't give their money to the cooperative program, which is a very reasonable concern. And there's concerns people will just leave.
And those aren't just concerns. Those things are actually happening. People are leaving. People are not giving. People are kind of sitting back and watching and waiting to see, because we're at a pivotal point here.
Yeah. And that's the conversations that a lot of the pastors are having. Is what do we do with this? And we're going to watch and see, and we're okay to leave if we need to because we want to focus on these things, and this is such a distraction. And I'll just put my cards on the table. I was really in that place before being called to Nebraska, but let's watch and see. Let's not give money to lawyers who are fighting it out and big organization machines that are keeping the organization running. Let's give money to the front lines of ministry. Sure. So we changed up a lot of our giving structure and just said we're going to bypass this whole thing. And
go back to what the SBC started to do at the very beginning, was give money to missionaries.
Right. And I was just watching, and now I'm pretty relieved as I'm looking, and I got a lot to learn in the EFCA, and I've been looking and reading over a lot of the material. It's a much smaller organization, but they seem less distracted. So I'm relieved to say, okay, we get to get back to a lot of the mission around the world. Yeah, they don't send as many, but they seem to be doing it more effectively, in my opinion. Yeah, we get to get back to this relief. Yes, they don't have as much money. They don't have as many resources. Sure. But because they're a lot more dependent on the Lord, dependent on the faithful work of the people, they're not as distracted. So I know a lot of people might disagree with me if you're in the SBC, but it does seem like there's a real big distraction these last 4, 5, 6 years.
100%. Already you've talked about just issues and little things going on within our own 2-state convention. So, let alone nationally.
And we could drill that down even more local. You have local associations, and there's arguments about what the identity should be, and who are we, and what should we do, and I think this, and I think that. And the question is, at what point do we relax and allow a lot more diversity? And that could be dangerous. You could allow so much diversity, you've now lost doctrinal lines. Right. At what point do we tighten up and not have as much diversity in doctrine and how we do things, but we lose some of the broader open tent? The question here is, where's the line? Sure. And it's a gray area, and a lot of people are wanting to move the boundaries. They want to move the markers, right? Say, this line is much closer to what I look like. Yep. You want everybody to be like me? Or this line is way out here, and we have lots of differences. The hard part is, there are definitely times when that line, I think, is too far. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we're doing things that don't look very biblical, and the Baptist distinctions are getting real fuzzy, real blurry.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what happened last year with the stuff with Saddleback.
Well, and look at the United Methodist Convention and everything that happened there this year. So anything's possible. I'm a little jealous that you're going to leave the circus. I'll be popping my popcorn and seeing what happens. And hopefully, at the end of the day, we can get back to what being a Southern Baptist is really all about, and that's advancing the gospel.
Let's be clear. I think that's what everybody wants. I think everybody wants to get back to this thing. I think what's really a disagreement is how we do that.
Yeah.
How do we get back? And actually, what is back? Or what rights this big ship?
Sure.
I think everybody would agree we got some problems.
Yeah.
How do we get it back?
Well, we didn't get here in a day, and we're not going to fix it in a day. The same type of thing happened in the 80s. The Southern Baptists were able to right the ship. So let's just pray and watch, and hopefully they'll be able to right the ship again.
Amen.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening. Salty Believer Unscripted is a production of SaltyBeliever.com. Visit the website to find more resources like the podcast you've just listened to.